What up, Bruh?
What up, Bruhs?
And welcome to another BruhVision.
Another BruhVision episode. We back.
Tony, this week, tell them what we're doing.
You know, the idea of BruhVision, the reason why we started it is to kind of like open up what we're able to talk about and have conversations about. You know, we had done a rewatch podcast for Boy Meets World for quite some time. And we were like, oh, we really want to be able to speak on these other things that are happening. And it's interesting because when we were talking about doing a rewatch podcast, Boy Meets World was, of course, a show that we settled on. But we talked about a lot of other different shows, Fresh Prince, and another one, Living Single. And I was really interested to have a conversation with you about Living Single specifically this week because Kim Coles and Erika Alexander dropped the Reliving Single podcast.
Great name.
And
great name.
It's a perfect name. And I just knew that we needed to have just a little chit chat about that because we had been talking about doing something similar to this for a very long time.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that because everyone has always been asking us what were we going to do after Boy Meets World. And I was like, if in my dream world, it would have been a Living Single podcast because I live and breathe Living Single. Like as much as Boy Meets World was important to me, the second most important series in my entire life would be Living Single. And I did my own little rewatch not too long ago, and it totally influenced my personality. It influenced my sense of humor and how I think about the world. I think more people should watch shows like this because as much as we talk about a young white boy in the middle of America influencing us and how we think about life, watching 4 grown Black women have run businesses, be entrepreneurs, try to find love, have friendship, like all of those things also really influenced me. And I think it's part of like the foundation of like what I believe about women and why I love them and I value them and I champion Black women because I see their struggles. And I am so happy that there exists a Reliving podcast. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it because if you guys ever want to know like what we want to share with you, this is right up my lane.
Okay, so before we get into talking about the actual podcast, you know, you had briefly talked about how much the show Living Single meant to you. What's your first memory of Living Single? Did you watch it with your family? Did you watch it in reruns? Like, how did you first take in the show?
So it's one of those things where it's like, in all honesty, I don't know what the real thing is because I watched it on television. But like another part of me is like, I feel like I was too young to watch it live. Like I don't think that makes sense. Yeah, I was or were not too young.
You were because we're basically the same age, and I remember watching it live.
Okay, so maybe I did watch it live. I was like, I don't remember, but I do know that I lived with it on syndication. Like when it was on TV, when it was on syndication, early news, I watched repeatedly. It's one of those shows where me and my sister would like sit down in the afternoon and watch the same episodes back to back to back. I know that show like the back of my hand. And Living Single is just like one of those shows that, as we talked about, it was not only foundational in a lot of households, but it is the precursor to Friends. Like in the history of television, I even went and I did the Warner Brothers tour, and they acknowledge now there's a little plaque that says Living Single, the precursor to Friends. And it's like, we would not have Friends if not for Living Single. So I just think that that's really important.
Okay, so just to date myself a little bit, and here's actually a surprising thing you may not know about me. Friends was a show that I watched almost exclusively in syndication because Thursday nights for me, while everyone else was talking about must-see TV on NBC, my black ass was watching Fox. Living Single, Martin, and New York Undercover was a time for me. It's one of those, and honestly, you had to be there because it felt like the blackest night on television, but it also just felt like the humor that I was getting from Martin and Living Single, and then like the rawness of New York Undercover. It was just appointment television that I had to be there for. And so, you know, like I said, like a lot of my time watching Friends, which aired at the same time, on a different network, I missed because I was too caught up in whatever Fox was doing on Thursday night. And, you know, this was my first exposure to Queen Latifah. This was my first exposure to Kim Fields and, you know, the rest of the cast. I had watched some of In Living Color, but that was a little bit I was a little bit too young for Living Color at that time. I caught up with that in syndication as well. So, this was just like a really important show for me that I was excited to watch every single week with my family.
So it's really funny that you say that because now that I think about it, Living Single was like also a gateway show for me in a lot of ways. Like you said, I get to learn who Queen Latifah is. Like I know UNITY at this point in time, but like I got to know Queen Latifah because of this show. We were young, so we don't really know Kim Fields' history as Tootie and like, as a child star before this show. Like this is what I'm growing up and I'm learning, and only because of this show do I go back and I'm like, same thing with Erika Alexander. I'm past the age of her cousin Pam years, so for me I'm learning, oh, she was Color Pam. Also, we had a lot of the cast of, God, I'm blanking on it right now, A Different World. A lot
Yes.
of the Different World cast comes into this show. So it's actually a great gateway show in terms of Black television, Black actors. Like we had Morris Chestnut, fine. You get Nia Long in her early careers, Vivica A. Fox. Like all these people are coming through this set and we are eating as a culture.
Absolutely.
And to your point that you had pointed out, the comedy is next level. It's still some of the funniest comedy out, and it's 30 years old. And I think that's fantastic.
Funniest stuff out, and it was just like, it's a combination of the writing but also the performances. It just felt like this cast came to eat every single time that they did a show. And I like listen to the podcast, and then I went back and just watched a few clips online, and I was just like, wow, the energy that they're bringing, the performances, such smart comedic choices that are being made by everyone on the cast. And to the point where it's interesting, because you were talking about Queen Latifah. I didn't know she was a rapper before. I just thought of her as an actress. So to understand that those were the early days of her acting. And by the way, the jump from Living Single to Set It Off blew my mind as a kid.
Right?
Blew my mind. And I was just like, wow, she was just a force to be reckoned with, even early in her career, in the ways that I really didn't appreciate. Just getting into the Reliving Single podcast, they talk about episode 1, but they also have a pre-episode where they just kind of talk about how they came to be on Living Single and their journeys with the show, which I actually found to be probably more interesting than the episode recap, and I have a lot of notes on that, but I want to see what notes you have and what you want to kind of pinpoint.
Absolutely. The pre-episode, to me, the from the beginning episode that they had out, is really important because it does give you the background. I think one of the things that people didn't know, again, like I don't know how everyone else came to Living Single, but in my world, Queen Latifah has always been the star. It's kind of like Will Smith, just always being the star. So I did not know that it was actually started off as a Kim Coles and Queen Latifah vehicle. And it was something because Kim Coles' success in Living Color, this was a time where we were giving a lot of stand-up comedians TV shows, and it just kind of built from there. Hearing that, like, Kim Coles' agent was named Sinclair, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Kyle is the name of the showrunner's boyfriend at the time. Like all of these like little fun facts of like where the names come from. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I love it. And to see that they also had Kim Fields in mind from day one as Regine, and like this, I love what Erika Alexander says when she's like, Kim Fields' approach to, hey, I was a child star and now I need to do something different, is like the laying the groundwork for all these other Disney stars.
Sure.
Who started to do the exact same thing of like, hey, you know me as a child star, I'm going to take on a more riskier role. I was like, oh no, that's exactly what this is. And I love that this podcast is giving everyone their flowers right now and acknowledging all the little ways that this show came together.
A few things about the development of the show and how they started. Yes, Kim Fields was great. To your point, I never knew her as a child star. Facts of Life was something that I later watched in reruns on like Nick at Night. Like I really didn't know. I just thought that was her. And I had the biggest crush on her when I was a kid too. The fact that the show was inspired by a scene in Jungle Fever also Such an interesting tidbit of information that someone was watching Jungle Fever and was like, this little scene of just these Black women chit-chatting, this could be a whole show. And to think about like Insecure and all of these other things that have kind of girlfriends that have come in the wake of this, to think it all spawned from a dinner scene in Jungle Fever is so fascinating to
Again,
like find
it's
those
really
origins.
going back to like the roots of like of television, and I love the way that they talk about it. They're like, "Oh, we built Fox," because they're not wrong. Like you
Yes.
talked about it earlier, New York Undercover. I don't know about anybody else. New York Undercover was appointment television in my household. I was a child, and we were like, "I need to see what Julius is up to." I'm going like Detective Eddie, I mean, he did a lot for light-skinned Latinos. He just did. He brought him up there. We were like, I don't know, the slit curl means something.
Yeah.
Again, from a child, I was like, oh, this is appointment television in my world. And it were great stories and they were good television. They absolutely did set the foundation for Fox to become the juggernaut that it is. And I really like that they are calling these things out.
I found it so fascinating, this bit of conversation about them starting Fox, because first of all, this is something that we've talked about a lot. And, you know, it was interesting hearing Kim talk about how even when In Living Color was first starting, there was an enthusiasm from Fox to represent these marginalized communities, to be a voice that's different and separate from what's going on the three main networks. I also love how this is kind of separate, but I mean, it is Fox in Living Color. They talk about how In Living Color is responsible for the Super Bowl halftime show.
Yeah.
Like what Fox was doing in terms of tapping into our culture, incorporating hip hop culture into the zeitgeist made such a big impression that the Super Bowl was like, we have to, like literally the next year they were like, get Michael Jackson on the phone, like find the most famous person you can because we cannot lose to Fox again. It just goes to show that they were really tapping into that culture, and to understand the brand Fox, which I associate a lot with Fox News now, how far things have come in that time. I mean, they talk about how a new network president came on shortly after Living Single and decided to take the show in a different direction. Kind of, for me, like the downfall of Fox after that. I don't really know that there was a lot of Fox shows that really caught my attention after this period where they took that hard pivot, which even as a young consumer of network television, I was able to spot and be like, wow, this feels different.
Well, I will say like their animation and then if we're going to talk post 90s, because 90s Fox was like A1, but like their animation department, adult animation, and then reality TV is kind of like what they hung their hat on. But I think the point that we're trying to say is like the story of Living Single and how it came together and everything that it meant. Like they were talking about like the different demographics, about how people from all walks of life would be like, I love you girls. It's phenomenal. And I think one of the things that I'm responding the most to is getting to hear Erika Alexander's approach and mindset and how she moves throughout the world. Because when she was like, I don't like it being called a Black show because then it gets put into a box, I was like, yes, not because she's like, I don't have a problem with Black media. I have a problem with the fact that we didn't give ourselves that label. This was something that a focus group, this was something that a studio head decided to label us in order to demean us. And I was like, yes, these are the conversations that podcasts were made for. And I'm so proud that she's a part of it.
I loved the nuanced take of Black shows that they have, because this is something we've spoke on a lot, that even as kids, we had an understanding of a Black show versus a white show in the 90s because television felt very segregated at that time. And, you know, Erika does a great job of saying, I felt the difference of what was perceived as a Black show versus a show with a Black cast, because I was on The Cosby Show, which was the #1 show in the world. Then I was on Living Single, which was the #1 Black show in the world. And the way those two things were treated really opened my eyes to how perception plays in not only support from the networks in terms of promotion, but also investment in dollars and salaries and all these things. So it's interesting because I feel like a lot of times when we've talked about like Black shows versus white shows, sometimes we get pushback of being like, well, that wasn't really a thing. But it's like, no, it was, and it felt purposeful.
Absolutely. And to your point, to kind of bring it back to Boy Meets World, it's one of the first questions we asked the cast in our our season 1 recap where we were like, why do you think Black shows weren't given the same promotions or the kind of same crossovers that you guys did? Like, we had this conversation with them when they were talking about, oh, we did crossovers with Sabrina, or so and so would show up on You Wish. And we were like, why not Sister Sister? Like, you guys are the number one show. Sister Sister is a huge, impactful show. Why is
Family
the Black
Matters, any of
shows,
that.
yeah, why is that not happening? And then on top of that, you have Erika Alexander talk about the fact that, like, when they are doing these panels, when they're going on these tours, she noticed that, like, we would do our stuff and then be asked to leave, whereas all these other shows on Fox are being taken everywhere, and they're being asked all these questions, and they're just not given the same respect. And I love that we are having these conversations, because it's important for people to understand it is not by accident that you don't know as much about Black television as the numbers would express.
Yeah, to your point, it's not just that they were the Black show versus shows with a Black cast, which is the category that they put Cosby and The Fresh Prince. They were like, even in our own network, Ally McBeal and X-Files were treated vastly differently than we were in terms of promotion and other things. And it just goes to show that the moment that Fox felt like that they could build on a white audience, they took it and ran. They were ready for it.
Which, again, time and time again.
And what's interesting, too, because you were talking about how in the 2000s they pivoted, American Idol started in 2001. And I think from there on, Fox was like, this is our new bread and butter. We don't have to do the Black show thing. We're moving on from that.
Well, you know what actually happens not too far after 2001, we also get a writer's strike. And once we get that writer's strike, they're like, oh, we don't have, again, it always comes back to money and them not valuing the market. Because if there is one thing Sinners has shown us, Cowboy Carter has shown us, and now all of these other things that are being made and applauded and imitated, the Met, all of these things have showed us is that the Black dollar and the brown dollar in general goes really, really far. But that doesn't serve their purpose, and that doesn't serve the narrative that they want to put out there. So they will do whatever they can, even if it's giving them money to diminish its accomplishments.
And part of the reason why I thought this conversation was so nuanced is because on one hand, you have Erika kind of talking about the downsides of being labeled a Black show. But then you have Kim noting how for the Black community to feel like they have ownership over some form of entertainment, to be able to see themselves mirrored on television, it brought out such pride from our community. I mean, the quote unquote Black shows were some of my favorite shows of the 90s. I mean, even like the lesser known stuff that we don't really talk about anymore, like Malcolm and Eddie and like the Steve Harvey show.
Hanging with Mr. Cooper.
Hanging with Mr. Cooper. Like, there was just something about feeling like, oh, wow, this is for us. And even though it probably had negative consequences for them on the show in terms of the support that they got, what it meant to our community was something different. And so that's why when people argue with me about like, oh, Black shows, white shows weren't a thing, it's like, no, they were. And it was also important for our culture to have that at that time too.
Well, so what's interesting to me is we grew up with it. Even though I was, as you said, as a child, I could tell the difference. These are Black shows, these are white shows. I also grew up with just having this option. So it became something that I did expect. It became something that when it disappeared, there was a vacuum, because I understood that shows could be successful, that Black television was funny, that I could laugh at Living Single and The Nanny and Friends all at the exact same time. And when you listen to other people who love Living Single or Martin or Fresh Prince, that demographic is beyond Black people. Our stories are universal. They do deserve just as much love and fanfare, but they aren't given the spotlight. And I think that to me is what's interesting. This idea that because I grew up with it, not only was it like, oh yeah, this is for us, but like it also was kind of like a given. It's like, yeah, why would we not have these things?
I really think we took it for granted that we had so much of it, like entire networks devoted to it, because even now, I think Damon Wayans just had a show that was canceled.
Yes.
There's not a lot out there right now. And I know that the pivot to streaming has changed a lot in the landscape of television, but one of the things that has changed in that too is us not having a channel that's, going to cater to a community that's underserved in media. And you would think that streaming would actually capitalize on that, but because they're so focused on getting the broadest audience possible, minorities are actually often left out of the like budgeting plans for Netflix and Hulu and all of these other things.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, something like Steve Harvey and Living Single, it also goes back to when you give us chances and opportunities, we usually elevate other people. Like if you look at the cast of Living Single, the entire history of it, Will Ferrell was on there, Rosie O'Donnell was on there. There are so many people from different demographics who got their starts or get some of their earliest acting credits on our shows. So we put other cultures on, and our success lays the groundwork for other people's success.
And to their point, when they review episode 1, Erika talks about getting recognized by a bunch of Jewish men. They're like, we were number 1. There's no way you can become number 1 unless you have a diverse audience. It just had such a broader impact than just being for this one community.
You just brought up Max. And I want to talk about Max because Erika Alexander talks about how she auditioned for this role and they were like, she was kind of holding back. And it's like when you see her in her first scene, her energy is so phenomenal coming in that the idea that she would get the notes, she was kind of holding back, lets you know immediately that there was a bias. And I think the thing that's really interesting about this podcast is it's late, like as Pod Meets World has let us know exactly everything that's going on behind the scenes in terms of television and children's show. This podcast opens the door for what it's like to be Black creatives and Black successful, because the idea that someone as seasoned and as phenomenally intuitively funny as Erika Alexander to be told she wasn't quite giving it, only for her to be like, no, not only do I know that I was, but Les Moonves himself wanted me and came to me to select me out, shows that it was never about your performance, but you do need people who are advocating for you.
You know, I think this does lead into the colorism conversation, which I want to get to. But one thing I just want to say about Erika Alexander specifically is she was talking about her acting experience, how she was acting since 14, how Bill Cosby selected her to be on the #1 show in the world. I know we have a very different understanding of Bill Cosby now. And maybe for those youngins who don't get it, like the perception of Black people in the United States altered after the Cosby Show in a 100%. Way that I cannot communicate to people who weren't there. Like it just fundamentally changed how Black people were seen. And again, it was the #1 show on TV, period. So for her to get that call to be on that show is massive. For her to be represented by an agency that said, we don't accept teens and you are one of two, the other being Michael J. motherfucking Fox. She is in a category where she is undeniable at that point. So when they get to the conversation of colorism and she's like, actually, there's some realities that I experience. And there was a little bit of pushback from Kim. I was like, oh, were you not listening to like how talented she is and like all her experience and why the only reason she probably got pushback from that producer was maybe she was dark skinned? Like all of those things add up to me. The math is mathing. From my 100%. Perspective.
Like I think this is going to be so much fun because they are not shying away from these conversations. The idea of Kim Coles being like, I don't know, I don't think it was that. Because what happened was Erika goes, you're being very light skinned right now. And we all understood what that meant. And for those of you who don't know, that is when a Black person with usually darker melanated skin is telling a person with lighter, fairer skin that you are speaking from a point of privilege right now, and very much like white privilege or male privilege or anything else. That does not mean that you don't experience hardship, but you can't speak for all of us because your experience is going to be different. You do in fact have certain privileges, or you are not going to experience the world in the same way that I do. And I love that they called it out, but I also love that they came to a conclusion of like, there's no harm meant. I don't even think that you have malice or ill intent. It's just a reality of our experiences, and I'm right. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm letting you know objectively, you can have your understanding or your excuses as to why this may have happened. But as someone who was on both the #1 show on television and the #1 Black show on television, there is a difference, and colorism does exist.
You know, it's interesting because, in all fairness to Kim Coles, I think what she was objecting to is this idea that the cast or crew of Living Single somehow had colorist favoritism amongst them. Whereas Erika was kind of speaking to the broader experience of just being a dark skinned Black person, not only in Hollywood, but in America, and how that treatment differs. And I want to give Kim the benefit of the doubt in assuming that she was like, hey, I never treated you differently because of this, which is fine. But also, that's kind of a light skinned thing to do.
Yeah, it is. But like, here's the thing: it's one of those things where it's like I love it because it really did show the reality, and the reality of it is these are things that even within our own community we struggle with. We have to have understanding and kindness and patience, and understand that like we always say, Blackness is not a monolith, and that little interaction showed the different ways that people can come and interpret the world around them, and one having more objective experience and one being like, well, I don't see it that way. And again, no one's wrong in their perception, but the reality of the situation usually is a little bit more nuanced. Another thing that I just want to call out, since we're talking about this, is Erika Alexander talked about her dreadlocks and how impactful, how important that is to have those dreads and be professionals. And what
Yes.
it said about Black professionals, we were showing Blackness in a way that the Cosby Show wasn't even really doing. Like the idea of having names like Khadijah or Sinclair means so much, and it goes so far in terms of representation in the smallest of ways, because Khadijah was just a name like Rachel, like Phoebe, and everyone learned how to pronounce it. And everyone learned how to say it, and her friends didn't have problems spelling it. It just was what it was. And I think that that goes a really long way in terms of representation.
You know, a few things. First of all, I love that Erika brought up that there is a difference in just in going back to the colorism conversation and how dark-skinned men and dark-skinned women are even treated differently. So like even amongst the community of darker-skinned Black people, men have a different path than dark-skinned women, whereas dark-skinned men are sometimes seen as more sexualized, more favorable than the dark-skinned women are. I just love her kind of breaking that down. But to your point about how they were able to incorporate dreads, incorporate color, incorporate like the culture in a way that's still professional. Because Bill Cosby, he's always been like, you know, pull your pants up kind of guy. Like he's from the school of Sidney Poitier, of just like, you need to speak refined, you need to look distinguished, you need to appease the white gaze. Whereas in Living Single, they're like, no, there's actually a way where we can do both. And in a way that I think was a big conflict amongst Fresh Prince, like between Will and Uncle Phil. We see that kind of play out there. We see a very similar thing between The Cosby Show and Living Single, of them kind of highlighting how, like, not only is this not a weakness, it's a strength. The fact that Flavor magazine is the centerpiece of the show goes to, you know, further prove that, like, embracing this culture is actually what's going to make us stronger.
Absolutely. Just some more things that they talk about when we get into the pilot episode that they were covering is this idea of happy accidents that happen in production. And like, you don't win all the battles that you fight for. Like this idea of Kim Coles said that like it was originally called My Girls, and then they changed it because of the movie My Girls, ironically. But that led to Queen Latifah recording the theme song, which is iconic in its own right, and then became something where it's like, I can't imagine the show being named anything else. Living Single doesn't sound right when you first hear it, but it's iconic, it separates itself, and that was something that as creatives, they themselves fought against, but it turned out to be the right move. And I just think that is really important when it comes to creating any kind of art. Sometimes you may want to fight for what you think is right, but you don't know the magic that's right around the corner.
I just, you know, was reading a quote from Steven Spielberg where he was talking about how if you show up on day one of filming your movie and you just expect to follow the script verbatim, it's not going to be the movie you want. It has to be allowed to live and breathe and fluctuate depending on actors and ideas that come, the weather, all of these things changes what a story ultimately is, and you have to be flexible. And in television, you know, we see that a lot with a show learning to right to the strengths of its cast. You know, Erika talks about how like there wasn't really a role here. Like, so much of it is me. I had to show up and just be me in so many ways. So I can't really even separate myself from this character because there wasn't really much there. And then once I showed up with that personality, obviously the show adjusted to that. But it just kind of goes to show that, like, you're talking about, the happy accidents of it all.
Absolutely. And another thing to me that's really important about the show is each of the characters, while they have their own, I guess you could say, tropes or archetypes, they are individual and they are unique and they do reflect the actors that they come from. Like, I love the conversation about Sinclair's not dumb. She's not a dumb
Yes.
character. She actually is just, she thinks differently. She actually thinks that if we're going to be international, using a British voice is a way to convey that. She thinks outside the box. And to me, it was very Phoebe. Like, there's a
Yeah.
reason why the Phoebe character is needed in Friends. And that kind of like whimsical nature is crucial to a friend group like that, but also to the comedy and the story. And then the character of Overton, same thing. He is not a simpleton. He is a country man who actually is really intelligent and is filled with like folksy wisdom, but is underestimated because of his background, because of his roots. And then we also get the story of Regine, who she's not a gold digger, she's a goal digger. She
Yeah.
knew what she wanted in life and she made those things her milestones. And then even like it's because of Regine, wig culture was embraced. I think all of those things are actually right there on the page when you look at the show.
And they just, to your point, had so much respect for like Overton not just being seen as simple, as being seen as intelligent in his own way. The importance of having Maxine and Kyle both be these distinguished professionals in their job while also just being cool as shit at the same time. There's just such a great balance there in terms of making these characters three-dimensional, even though they are playing very traditional sitcom tropes. They're doing it in a way that they're bringing so much life to these characters that it transcends the trope.
Absolutely. And I think something like the idea of Khadijah being an entrepreneur and someone who owned her business and would need to like constantly work and worry about money and how we're going to get this out and all this other stuff. Also extremely impactful because we are showing Black people not only have the aspirations of owning their own things and wanting to give back to the culture, but the struggle. And it's not struggle in the sense of roots is a struggle, but it's struggle in the sense of like, it's not easy when you're out there on your own. And again, I think we have these blueprints in front of us mostly because of this show.
You know, I have to ask you, did you buy Black magazines in the 90s?
I did not buy them, but I went to Black barbershops because they were always there. Like, I didn't have to buy them.
I would buy them all the time because I wanted the posters of the musicians that they had inside. Like, there was something about this time period pre-internet where like magazines were like the only way that we had culture. Like, I can't remember going to my grandma's house where there wasn't a Jet magazine, you know, issue there for me to flip through. Like, there was something about these magazines that played such an important role. Even Black Panthers used magazines and publications like that to spread their message. Like, the Black community has use this as a form of communication and community building in such a way that for them to incorporate this into the show, yes, it's hip and timely, but it's also important in a way that I think they were very aware of.
Absolutely. As you said, especially pre-internet, it's the idea of giving a voice to underrepresented communities and the way that the show continuously wanted to champion that. And I want to bring it back to the different ways in which they championed underrepresented communities. Like the thing about the show, it's set in Brooklyn. And this is before Brooklyn becomes like the number one place where all of the millennials want to go.
Pre-gentrification, yeah.
Yeah, pre-gentrification. This is Brooklyn at its root, at its core. When
This
it
is
was
vampire in Brooklyn.
But my
This
point
is
is,
Brooklyn.
this is Brooklyn. But the point is, this is when Brooklyn wasn't given the same prestige, glamour, investment as
Sure.
Manhattan was. And you had these people who still saw the value in their surroundings. And again, I don't think that enough can be said about this show. And I think ultimately, I am so glad that this rewatch podcast exists, that it has these two hosts and that they are coming to it being real, being themselves, and really dissecting how and sharing how the show got made and why certain storylines are who they are. And I think one of the best things is they're consistently giving credit to the many hands that went into creating this show.
Absolutely. Okay, before we move on, I just want to ask, who are you most excited for them to have onto the podcast?
And honestly, there is no one that they will bring that I will be like, I don't care. Because I'm excited about all of it. Like Yvette Lee Bowser, like the creator of the show, I'm excited about them. So growing up.
Wait. You just brought up Yvette, and I just want to point out something that they said about how they wanted her to be the showrunner, but didn't feel she had the experience. So a white man came in as the showrunner, understood immediately that she was right for the job, and just let her do her thing.
And still gets paid on every episode.
Still gets paid on every episode. But part of the reason probably the show was as impactful as it did is because a white man had enough sense to be like, I'm not the right voice for this, and recognized who was.
Yeah, no, honestly, like it goes back to the conversation that I'm really glad that they had going back to Les Moonves. For those of you who don't know, it was like the head of CBS, and he has like all this controversy, ended up having like his own Me Too movement, which, as they point out, was not their experience, but they were like, look, at the time, you did need people who were willing to advocate for you. And Cosby and Les, they did bad things. They have bad controversies attached to them, but they also were individuals who were speaking up for us and advocating for us. And that is still important. That is still crucial. And it just goes to show that hopefully everyone doing that isn't a piece of shit. These things can't happen without having backup, without having allyship and white people who are willing to do their part. And as you said, either go to bat for you or know when to step aside.
Exactly. You know, I had asked you who you're excited to see. I'm obviously all of the core cast I'm so excited to see, but I'm really excited to hear Queen Latifah come on and talk about her experience, just because, like Kim, she was there from the beginning. The fact that Queen Latifah has a whole career that happened before the show even started, her touring as young as in her teens, like she is such an icon in ways that I feel like we don't give her credit for. Every time I hear her sing that song in Hairspray, I cry. Like she is such a generational talent in ways that I feel like she doesn't get her flowers for, but you know, hopefully it won't be that circumstance where she has to pass for everyone to kind of recognize just how incredible she was. And in terms of Black queer representation, like it's hard to find someone other than Queen Latifah who's willing to like go first and be like, you know what, actually my hands up, it's me.
Not only that, but like I'm sure we'll get into this, but Queen Latifah was a fashion icon on this show. Like her fits, her hair, to this day, I don't know anybody who has done more for a silk press than Queen Latifah.
When Kim said the first time she saw Queen Latifah was at an award show and she went up to Queen, she's like, I want to be a queen. And Queen Latifah's like, you are a queen. I was like, that's the energy. That's
Absolutely.
the energy I want.
Oh, so what I was going to say earlier when you were asking me like who I'm excited to see, it's really funny because growing up, when I watched this show, I think one of the reasons why I tied to it is I connected to like Khadijah is how my mom behaved. It's who my mom was growing up. And Overton was my father. And it's so crazy because like literally anyone who meets either of my parents, those two characters are exactly how my parents behave. So, and my father is actually also from Ohio, which is where the character Overton is from. It is so exciting for me because when I say representation, I've never seen anyone on television like my father, the way that Overton was just kind of like a copy and paste version of who I grew up with.
And I feel like you don't get that representation without having Black people in the creative functions of a show, bringing their real world and real life experience into the writer's room, into the conception of the show, saying, actually, I know a Black guy who's like this, even though a white person may never think to write a Black character that way. They don't know the way our uncles talk. They don't know the way our cousins be. And it's just such a wide variety. So to get that representation means that someone was able to bring in something that was true to our community that had otherwise would have been ignored by, you know, NBC or some of those other networks.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to say about this? this?
No, I don't know how often we're going to talk about this, if we're going to revisit this or not, but I would be willing to, after a few episodes, maybe jump back on here. We'll see if there's a need for that or if people want that or not. But in general, I'm so excited that the show exists. I was getting exhausted with rewatch podcasts. It seems like there were so many of them, and this is the first time that I'm actually excited about one again. I hope this brings new focus onto the original show, and maybe people who grew up with it, who hadn't watched it in a while, start watching it with their kids, and a new generation can start to have that appreciation for the show as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm really excited, I think we've kind of like very clearly given her flowers, but I'm really excited for everyone to talk about and learn the comedic stylings of Erika Alexander, because when I tell you this show is very successful, but in many ways to me, the character of Max is kind of one of the breakout stars of this show. And the comedy, the physical, the comedic timing, the line reading is so important to learn and to study if you enjoy comedy, and to know that the person at the helm of that is a Black woman is just so important to me.
And the fact that her voice is like, she is one of the co-hosts on here and she's not going to soft pedal the real. I know we're going to get some tea from this podcast. I'm so excited.
So thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed this and you want us to cover more of the Reliving Single, let us know. We will be coming out with more new content about things that are coming out, movies, television, books, lots of stuff, tours. I'm trying to pressure Tony to go see Cowboy Carter tour. But either way, we love having these conversations with you guys. We will be back. And thank you so much for checking us out.
Later, bros.
Later, bro.